The old truck rumbled down the muddy road as rain pounded against the windshield. Henry Parker gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting through the downpour. The wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the storm. Just another mile to go before he'd be home, back to his workshop where a half-finished rocking chair waited for his attention. Henry wasn't a young man anymore. At 42, with streaks of gray in his dark hair and lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, he had the worn hands of someone who'd spent his life working with wood. The small coastal town of Pine Harbor had been his home for only 3 years, but his reputation as a skilled furniture restorer had spread quickly. As he pulled into the gravel driveway beside his old Victorian house, his headlights swept across, something unexpected on the porch, a large package leaning against his front door. Henry frowned. He wasn't expecting any deliveries, especially not on a night like this. He parked, grabbed his jacket to shield himself from the rain, and made a dash for the porch. The package was a wooden crate roughly the size of a coffee table, weathered and worn like it had traveled a great distance. No shipping label, no return address, just his name written in faded black ink that was starting to run in the rain. "What the hell?" he muttered, running his fingers over the strange markings carved into the wood. They looked like symbols, from some ancient language, nothing he recognized despite his years of working with antiques. Henry tried to lift the crate, grunting with surprise. It was much heavier than it looked. After a moment of consideration, he decided to slide it across the porch and through his front door rather than try to carry it. Once inside, he shook the rain from his hair and turned on the lights. His home was modest but comfortable, with furniture he'd either built himself or restored over the years. The living room opened directly into his workshop, a large space filled with tools, wood scraps, and projects in various stages of completion. Henry pushed the crate into the workshop and circled it slowly, studying it from all angles. The craftsmanship was unlike anything he'd seen before. The joints fitted together perfectly without nails or screws, and despite its weathered appearance, the wood itself seemed remarkably solid. "Who sent you?" he wondered aloud, kneeling to examine an old brass lock that held the lid shut. The lock was green with age, intricate patterns etched into its surface. Henry went to his tool bench and returned with a small flashlight, shining it over the symbols on the crate's sides. They seemed to shift under the light almost like they were moving when he wasn't looking directly at them. A chill ran down his spine, but he brushed it off as a trick of the shadows. "Let's see what you're hiding," he said, grabbing his toolbox. He tried several keys from his collection, but none fit. Next came lock-picking tools, a hobby he'd picked up years ago that occasionally came in handy with antique furniture. The lock resisted his efforts, seeming to grow warmer under his fingers. An hour passed as Henry tried everything he could think of to open the mysterious crate. Frustration mounted until finally, he sat back on his heels and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Fine," he muttered, reaching for a small hammer and chisel. "We'll do this the hard way." Just as the chisel touched the lock, a loud click echoed through the workshop. The lock had opened on its own. Henry stared, hammer frozen midair. "That's odd." Setting his tools aside, he hesitated before touching the lock again. It felt cool now. Normal. With careful fingers, he removed it and set it on his workbench. The room seemed quieter than before, the storm outside fading to background noise as Henry placed his hands on the crate's lid. Something about this moment felt important, like his life was balanced on the edge of before and after. "Don't be dramatic," he told himself with a nervous laugh. "It's just a box." He lifted the lid. The hinges gave a low, mournful creak as the lid swung back. Henry leaned forward, expecting old books perhaps, or family heirlooms someone wanted restored. What he saw instead made him stumble backward, knocking over his stool with a crash. Inside the crate, curled in a fetal position, was a young woman. "Oh my God." Henry gasped, his heart hammering against his ribs. She didn't move. Her skin was pale as moonlight, and her hair, a silver-white color that couldn't be natural, flowed around her like water. She wore a simple white dress made of a material he couldn't identify, something that seemed to shimmer slightly even in the dim light of his workshop. For one horrible moment, Henry thought she was dead. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. "Hey," he said softly, then louder. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. Henry reached out a trembling hand, then pulled back. Should he touch her? Call the police? An ambulance? His mind raced with possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Human trafficking, some kind of sick joke? But who would know where he lived? He'd kept to himself since moving to Pine Harbor after his divorce, making few friends outside of business relationships. "Hello?" He tried again, gently touching the woman's shoulder. She was warm, alive, but didn't stir. Her face was young, maybe mid-20s, with delicate features that seemed almost too perfect, like a sculpture rather than a person. Henry grabbed his phone from his pocket, ready to call 911, when he noticed something else inside the crate. Beneath where the woman lay was a letter, sealed with red wax impressed with the same symbols that decorated the outside of the box. His hand hovered over it. Call for help first, or read the letter? Curiosity won. He carefully slipped the letter out, trying not to disturb the unconscious woman. The paper was thick, expensive, and felt old between his fingers. He broke the seal and unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant but difficult to read, like someone had learned to write in another century. "Guardian," it began. "What you have received is not a what, but a who. Her name is Lyra. She is more precious than you can imagine and in more danger than you can understand. They will come for her. Keep her safe until she wakes. She will know what to do then. You were chosen because of your grandfather. Ask the question he always asked you." It was signed with only a symbol, the same as one carved on the crate. Henry read it twice more, confusion deepening with each reading. His grandfather had been dead for 15 years. What question? And who was they? A soft moan from the crate pulled him from his thoughts. The woman, Lyra, was stirring, her eyelids fluttering. Henry knelt beside the crate. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe." Her eyes opened, and Henry gasped. They were violet, not a dark blue that could pass for purple in certain lights, but true violet, like amethysts catching sunlight. Those impossible eyes fixed on him, filled with confusion and then, abruptly, fear. Lyra bolted upright, pressing herself against the far side of the crate as far from Henry as she could get. Her mouth opened in what looked like a scream, but no sound came out. "I'm not going to hurt you," Henry said quickly, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I don't know how you got here or who put you in this box, but I want to help." She stared at him, chest heaving with panicked breaths. Her eyes darted around the workshop, taking in the tools, the half-finished furniture, the rain-spattered windows. Slowly, the terror in her eyes faded, replaced by wary confusion. She looked down at the crate she was sitting in, running her fingers over the symbols carved into the inner walls. Then she looked back at Henry and pointed to herself. "Lyra," she said, her voice soft and slightly raspy, as if from disuse. "I am Lyra." Henry nodded. "I'm Henry Parker. Do you know how you got here? Who put you in this box?" Lyra frowned, touching her throat. She opened her mouth, tried to speak, then shook her head in frustration. "You can't talk?" Henry asked. She held up her hand, tilting it side to side in a sort of gesture. Then she pointed to her head and made a swirling motion. "Confused? You're confused?" Lyra nodded vigorously. The storm outside intensified, a crack of lightning illuminating the workshop in harsh white light. Lyra flinched violently, covering her ears as thunder followed seconds later. "It's just a storm," Henry explained gently. "You're safe in here." She didn't look convinced, hugging herself tightly, those strange violet eyes now shining with unshed tears. Henry made a decision. Whoever had sent this woman to him, whatever danger she might be in, she was clearly terrified and confused. He couldn't just call the police and have them take her away to be questioned by strangers. "Listen," he said, "why don't you come out of that box? I can make you something to eat, give you a place to rest, and tomorrow we can figure things out. Okay?" Lyra hesitated, studying his face like she was trying to read his soul. Finally, she gave a small nod and cautiously extended her hand. Henry helped her climb out of the crate, noticing how light she felt, how her feet barely seemed to touch the ground. She stood in his workshop, looking both out of place and somehow exactly where she belonged, while the storm raged outside and questions without answers filled the air between them. Neither of them noticed that the strange symbols on the crate had begun to glow with a faint blue light, or that the brass lock on Henry's workbench had silently closed itself once more. The kitchen light cast a warm glow as Henry set a mug of hot tea in front of Lyra. She sat at his worn wooden table, perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. Her silver-white hair caught the light in strange ways, almost seeming to glow from within. "Careful, it's hot," Henry warned, taking the seat across from her. Lyra stared at the steaming mug, then mimicked Henry's movements as he picked up his own tea. Her hands trembled slightly. When she took a sip, her eyes widened with surprise, then pleasure. "Good?" Henry asked. She nodded, taking another careful sip. 3 hours had passed since Henry had found her in the crate. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the trees. Occasionally, Lyra would flinch at particularly loud thunder cracks, but she seemed to be growing more comfortable with each passing hour. Henry had shown her around his small house, the living room with its mismatched furniture, the bathroom where he'd left her a clean towel and some of his ex-wife's old clothes she'd never bothered to take, and the spare bedroom where she could sleep. Lyra had touched everything with curious fingers, as if she'd never seen such ordinary objects before. "Can you write?" Henry asked now, sliding a notepad and pen across the table. Lyra picked up the pen, studying it with intense concentration. She made a few experimental marks on the paper, then looked up at Henry with frustration in her violet eyes. "Different writing system where you're from," he guessed. She nodded emphatically. Henry rubbed his tired eyes. It was nearly midnight, and the questions swirling in his head showed no signs of settling. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? Why had she been sent to him, of all people? "The letter mentioned my grandfather," Henry said, more to himself than to Lyra. "Said he used to ask me a question." Lyra perked up at this, leaning forward. She pointed to Henry, then made a rocking motion with her arms. "My grandfather?" Henry asked. When she nodded, he continued. "Yeah. I spent a lot of time with him when I was a kid. He taught me everything I know about woodworking." A memory surfaced. His grandfather's workshop, not unlike his own now, filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish. Summer afternoons spent learning how to sand wood until it felt like silk beneath his fingertips. And always, at the end of the day, the same question. "What do you see in the wood, Henry?" The words came back to him suddenly, clear as if his grandfather were standing beside him. It had been their ritual. Before starting any new project, his grandfather would hand him a piece of wood and ask what he saw in it. "That's it," Henry whispered. "The question he always asked me was, 'What do you see in the wood?'" The lights flickered and a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows. Lyra tensed, her eyes darting to the door. "It's just the storm," Henry reassured her, but she shook her head urgently, rising from her chair. She pointed to the workshop, then to herself, then made a hiding motion. "You want to hide? In the workshop?" Henry frowned. "Why?" Lyra's expression grew desperate. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the workshop door with surprising strength. Her eyes kept flicking to the windows, watching the darkness beyond. Okay, Henry said, allowing himself to be led. In the workshop, Lyra went straight to the wooden crate she had arrived in. The strange symbols carved into its sides were definitely glowing now, a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Henry hadn't imagined it earlier. "What the hell?" he muttered, approaching cautiously. Lyra knelt beside the crate, running her fingers over the glowing symbols. Her lips moved as if she were reading them, though no sound came out. Then she looked up at Henry, a question in her eyes. "I don't understand what these mean," he admitted. She shook her head, then pointed to the brass lock sitting on his workbench. It too was glowing now, the same pulsing blue. Lyra made a series of gestures, locking something, then pointing to herself, then to the doors and windows of the house. The lock protects you? Henry guessed. Keeps something out? She nodded, vigorously, then suddenly went still. Her head tilted as if listening to something Henry couldn't hear. Her face drained of what little color it had. A second later, Henry heard it too. A car engine, growing louder as it approached his isolated house. Headlights swept across the workshop windows as a vehicle pulled into his driveway. Lyra clutched his arm, her fingers digging in painfully. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. They will come for her, the letter had said. Hide, Henry whispered, guiding her to a storage closet at the back of the workshop. Stay quiet. He closed the closet, door just as a knock sounded at the front of the house. Henry took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He glanced at the crate. The symbols were glowing brighter now, more urgently. The knocking came again, louder this time. Henry grabbed the brass lock from his workbench, surprised by its warmth, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he went to answer the door. Two men stood on his porch, both wearing dark suits despite the pouring rain. They weren't wet, Henry noticed with a chill. Not a single drop of rain touched them, as if the water simply decided to fall around them instead. Can I help you? Henry asked, keeping his voice steady. Good evening, sir, the taller of the two said. His voice was pleasant enough, but his smile didn't reach his eyes, flat, gray eyes that reminded Henry of river stones. Sorry to disturb you so late. I'm Agent Fletcher and this is Agent Reynolds. We're investigating a missing person case. They held up badges too quickly for Henry to read them. At midnight? In this storm? Henry asked, not moving from the doorway. It's an urgent matter, the second man, Reynolds, said. His eyes scanned what he could see of the house behind Henry. We have reason to believe the missing person might have been brought to this area. I haven't seen anyone, Henry said. I live alone. Fletcher smiled again, that same empty expression. Mind if we come in and ask a few questions? It won't take long. Every instinct Henry had was screaming danger. These men weren't police or FBI or any legitimate agency. Something about them felt wrong, like they were wearing human suits that didn't quite fit. Actually, I do mind, Henry said firmly. It's late, and I was about to go to bed. If you want to come back tomorrow during normal hours, I'd be happy to help then. The men exchanged glances. We noticed a light on in your workshop, Reynolds said. Working late? Just finishing up a project, Henry replied. What kind of work do you do, Mr. Fletcher let the question hang. Parker. Henry Parker. I restore antique furniture. Interesting, Fletcher's eyes narrowed slightly. Any unusual deliveries lately? Large packages, perhaps? Henry's hand tightened on the door. No. Just the usual supplies. You're sure about that? Reynolds pressed. Nothing. Unexpected. A gust of wind blew rain onto the porch, spattering the wooden boards. The drops that landed near the men's shoes seemed to curve away as if repelled. I'm sure, Henry said. Now if you'll excuse me, it's late. Fletcher handed him a business card. If you see anything unusual or if someone comes to you for help, please call this number immediately. For your own safety, Mr. Parker. Henry took the card without looking at it. Good night, gentlemen. He closed the door before they could say anything else, his heart pounding. Through the side window he watched as they stood on the porch for a long moment, looking at his house as if they could see through the walls. Finally, they returned to their car, a black sedan with no markings, and drove away slowly. Henry waited until their taillights disappeared around the bend before rushing back to the workshop. The closet door was already open when he got there, Lyra standing beside it with wide, frightened eyes. They're gone, he told her. For now. She pointed to the business card still clutched in his hand. Henry looked down at it. Where there should have been a name and contact information, there was only a symbol. The same one from the letter. The same one carved into the crate. Who are they? Henry whispered. Lyra went to the crate and touched one of the glowing symbols. Then she made a capturing motion with her hands, followed by slashing movements across her wrists and throat. The message was clear enough. They want to capture you. Hurt you. She nodded grimly. Why? What makes you so important to them? Lyra looked around the workshop, her gaze settling on a half-empty glass of water on Henry's workbench. She approached it, held her hand over it, and closed her eyes in concentration. The water in the glass began to rise, defying gravity, forming a perfect floating sphere in midair. Henry stumbled back, knocking into his tool rack with a clatter. Holy shit! The water sphere collapsed back into the glass as Lyra's concentration broke. She looked at Henry with a mixture of pride and apprehension, clearly worried about his reaction. That's impossible, Henry breathed. Lyra shook her head, then pointed to herself, to the floating water, and then up at the sky. You're not from here, Henry said slowly. Not from Earth? She considered this, then gave a so-so gesture with her hand. Close enough, I guess, Henry muttered, trying to process what he'd just seen. And those men, they want your abilities. They want to use you somehow. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. She pointed to the brass lock in Henry's pocket, then to herself, and made a sleeping gesture. The lock kept you asleep in the box, Henry guessed. Contained your powers somehow. Another nod. Lyra pointed to the crate, then out the window in the direction the men had gone, then dragged her finger across her throat. If they get the crate, they can trap you again. Kill you. Henry felt cold despite the warmth of the workshop. But why send you to me? What am I supposed to do? Lyra touched his hand gently. The contact sent a strange tingle up his arm, like static electricity but warmer. She mimicked his grandfather's question. What do you see in the wood? By pointing to her eyes, then to the crate, then raising her hands in question. Look closer at the crate. Henry approached it cautiously. The symbols continued to pulse with blue light. What am I looking for? Lyra guided his hands to the bottom edge of the crate. There, barely visible, was a small compartment built into the wood. It would have been impossible to spot if you weren't looking for it. The work of a master craftsman. Henry's fingers found the hidden catch, and the compartment slid open. Inside was a small wooden box, no bigger than his palm, carved, from the same wood as the crate and bearing the same strange symbols. But unlike the crate, this box wasn't locked. With trembling fingers, Henry opened it. The small wooden box felt warm in Henry's palm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, despite being hidden away. He opened it carefully, holding his breath without, realizing it. Inside lay a simple wooden pendant on a leather cord. The pendant was carved into the shape of a tree, its branches spreading outward in delicate detail, roots mirroring the pattern below. In the center of the trunk was a small violet stone that caught the light with an inner fire. It's beautiful, Henry said, lifting the necklace from the box. Is it yours? Lyra shook her head, then pointed to him. Mine? This was meant for me? She nodded, gesturing for him to put it on. Henry hesitated only a moment before slipping the cord over his head. The pendant settled against his chest, warmer than it should be. The violet stone seemed to pulse once, twice, then settled into a gentle glow that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. A strange sensation washed over him, like stepping from a dark room into brilliant sunshine. His skin tingled, and for a brief moment he felt lighter, as if gravity had loosened its hold on him. What just... Henry began, then stopped as he heard Lyra's voice in his mind. Guardian, now you can hear me. Henry staggered back, catching himself on the edge of his workbench. You're in my head. Lyra smiled, and her voice came again, not through his ears but directly into his thoughts. Not exactly. The pendant creates a bridge between minds. I cannot speak your language with my voice, but I can share thoughts this way. That's impossible, Henry said, though he was quickly recalibrating his definition of impossible. He'd already seen this woman float water in midair. Telepathy shouldn't be that much more of a stretch. Many things you think impossible are simply unknown to you, Lyra replied. Her mental voice had an accent he couldn't place, musical and flowing. Where I come from, this is common. And where exactly is that? Henry asked, touching the pendant. It pulsed warmly against his fingertips. Lyra moved to the window, looking up at the night sky. Another world. Not distant in space, but in dimension, reality. Your language lacks the precise words. She turned back to him. Our worlds exist, side by side, touching but separate, like pages in a book. You're from a parallel world? Henry asked, trying to wrap his mind around the concept. Close enough. She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. My people call it Valen. We are guardians of the boundaries between realities. And those men, the ones who came looking for you? Lyra's expression darkened. The collectors. They hunt people like me, people with abilities. They trap us, use us, drain our energy for their machines. What kind of machines? Devices that allow them to move between worlds to take what isn't theirs. She touched the wooden crate, her fingers tracing the glowing symbols. This prison was designed to contain my power and preserve me during transport. The symbols are binding spells from my world. Henry looked at the crate with new understanding. So you were being trafficked? Kidnapped? Yes. The word came with a wave of fear and anger. I was captured 3 months ago by your time. The collectors raided my village. Many were taken. I am not the only one. But someone helped you escape, Henry said, remembering the letter. Someone sent you to me. Lyra nodded. The resistance. Those who fight against the collectors. They intercepted the shipment I was part of and redirected me here to you. But why me? I'm nobody special. Just a furniture restorer in a small town. Lyra's mental voice softened. Your grandfather was not just a woodworker, Henry Parker. He was a bridge, a human with the rare ability to sense the gaps between worlds. The resistance worked with him for many years. He helped many of my people escape the collectors. Henry sat down heavily on a nearby stool. His grandfather, the quiet old man who taught him to carve and sand, who told him stories about the spirits in the wood, had been part of some interdimensional resistance movement? It seemed impossible. And yet, memories resurfaced. His grandfather disappearing for days at a time on buying trips for special wood. The strange visitors who sometimes came to the workshop after hours, speaking in hushed tones. The collection of unusual locks and boxes his grandfather kept hidden. Away. The stories about people from elsewhere that Henry had always assumed were just fairy tales to entertain a child. He never told me, Henry whispered. To protect you, Lyra said gently. The collectors would have targeted you too if they knew. But they know now, Henry realized. They came here looking for you. They'll be back. Yes. Lyra's expression was grim. The crate's protection is fading. They can sense my energy now that I'm awake. We don't have much time. Time for what? What are we supposed to do? I must return to my world and seal the passage the collectors are using, but I need strength to open the way. The journey here weakened me. Henry ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. How long before you're strong enough? 3 days, perhaps 4. The pendant will help channel your energy to speed my recovery, but it will be dangerous for you to keep me here. The collectors will not give up easily. A plan began to form in Henry's mind. My friend Pete has a cabin in the mountains about 2 hours from here. No one knows about it except me. I helped him renovate it last year. We could hide there until you're strong enough. Relief washed over Lyra's face. Yes, that would be wise. We'll leave at first light, Henry decided. Pack only what we need. Thunder crashed outside, making them both jump. The storm was intensifying, wind howling around the old house like a living thing. There's something else you should know, Lyra said, her mental voice hesitant. The collectors. They don't always appear human. What you saw tonight was their disguise. In their true form, they are much more dangerous. What do they really look like? Lyra shuddered. Like shadows given flesh, like holes cut into reality. Great, Henry muttered. Nightmare fuel. A loud crash from the front of the house interrupted them. Henry froze, listening. It came again, the sound of splintering wood. Someone was breaking down his front door. They're here. Lyra's voice in his mind was panicked. They must have left someone watching the house. Henry grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back door of the workshop. We need to go. Now. They burst out into the raging storm, rain immediately soaking them to the skin. The wind tore at their clothes as they ran for Henry's truck, parked behind the workshop. Behind them. The sound of the front door giving way echoed through the night. Henry fumbled with his keys, his fingers numb with cold and fear. Come on, he muttered, finally getting the key into the ignition. The truck roared to life just as a figure rounded the corner of the house. In the flash of lightning, Henry caught a glimpse of something that wasn't entirely human. A dark silhouette with too many angles moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. Hang on, Henry shouted, throwing the truck into reverse. They fishtailed down the muddy driveway, tires struggling for purchase on the slick ground. Henry caught a glimpse in his rearview mirror. 3 figures now standing in the pouring rain watching the truck depart. They made no move to follow, which somehow made them even more terrifying. Only when they were a mile away, the house long out of sight, did Henry allow himself to breathe. You okay? He asked, glancing at Lyra. She nodded, water streaming from her silver-white hair. Her violet eyes seemed to glow in the darkness of the truck cab. They will follow. They can track the pendant now that it's activated. Then we don't go to the cabin, Henry decided, making a sharp turn onto a side road. At least not directly. We need to throw them off our trail first. As they drove through the storm, the pendant against Henry's chest pulsed with warmth, a constant reminder of the impossible situation he now found himself in. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been finishing a rocking chair restoration on time. Now he was fleeing from interdimensional traffickers with a woman who could move water with her mind. Life had certainly taken an unexpected turn. They drove in silence for a while, the rhythm of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof, the only sounds. Henry's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan beyond just drive away fast. We need supplies, he said finally. Food, clothes for you, maybe some tools. There's an all-night store about 40 minutes from here in the next town over. Is it safe? Safer than going back to the house. And we can't just drive around all night. The storm's getting worse and these mountain roads get dangerous in weather like this. As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind buffeted the truck, pushing it toward the edge of the road. Henry gripped the wheel tighter, slowing down. I'm sorry. Lyra's voice came softly in his mind. I've brought danger to your door. Hey, it's not your fault, Henry said. You didn't ask to be kidnapped and shipped across dimensions in a magic box. A small smile touched her lips. No, I did not. Besides, apparently this runs in the family. If my grandfather was involved with your people, maybe this was always going to be my path too. The pendant wouldn't have accepted you if you weren't meant to wear it, Lyra told him. It chooses its guardian. Great. Now I've got Lord of the Rings vibes on top of everything else, Henry muttered, but there was no real annoyance in his voice. They drove on through the storm, the wipers struggling to keep the windshield clear. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark white flashes. In one such flash, Henry spotted something on the road ahead, a fallen tree blocking their path. He slowed the truck, stopping a safe distance away. We'll have to find another route. As he put the truck in reverse, Lyra grabbed his arm. Wait. Something's wrong. What do you mean? That tree, it wasn't there a moment ago. And look, no broken branches, no torn roots. It's just placed there. Henry squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. She was right. The tree looked less like it had fallen and more like it had been deliberately positioned across the road. It's a trap, he realized, already shifting into reverse. Before he could back away, dark figures emerged from the woods on either side of the road. 3, then 5, then more, surrounding the truck in a loose circle. They moved with that same wrong rhythm Henry had glimpsed back at the house, their forms seeming to waver and shift in the rain. Collectors, Lyra's mental voice was tight with fear. And they've shed their disguises. In the next flash of lightning, Henry saw them clearly for the first time. What he had taken for men in dark clothing were nothing of the sort. They were like tears in reality, vaguely humanoid shapes composed of roiling darkness with limbs that bent at impossible angles and faces that were just smooth, featureless voids. Henry's blood ran cold. What do we do? Lyra's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his. The pendant on his chest blazed with sudden heat. Trust me. Before Henry could ask what she meant, the world around them exploded into blinding violet light. The violet light engulfed the truck, so bright that Henry had to squeeze his eyes shut. A strange sensation washed over him, like being submerged in warm water then suddenly lifted into the air. His stomach lurched as if he was falling, though he could still feel the solid seat beneath him. When the light faded and he dared to open his eyes again, the road, the storm, and the collectors were gone. The truck sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the ground with golden patches. Birds chirped overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. What just happened? Henry gasped, looking around in disbelief. Where are we? Beside him, Lyra slumped against the passenger door, her face pale and drawn. Safe, her mental voice whispered, much weaker than before. For now. Did you teleport us? Not exactly. More like slipped us sideways, into a pocket between realities. Temporary refuge. Henry noticed with alarm that her silver-white hair had dulled and dark circles had appeared under her eyes. You look exhausted. It takes significant energy to move between spaces, especially with a vehicle. Her eyelids fluttered. Need to rest. Of course, Henry said quickly. He looked around the clearing again, trying to get his bearings. The place seemed peaceful enough, though utterly unfamiliar. How long can we stay here? Few hours. No more. Lyra's mental voice was fading. The boundary will thin. Collectors will find a way through. They always do. And then what? But Lyra had already drifted into unconsciousness, her head resting against the window. The pendant around Henry's neck had dimmed, though it still pulsed gently against his chest. Henry sat in silence for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. His life had been turned upside down in ways he couldn't have imagined. Part of him wanted to believe this was all an elaborate dream, that he'd wake up at his workbench, a half-finished rocking chair in front of him, the memory of a strange woman with violet eyes already fading. But the weight of the pendant around his neck was real. The warm presence of Lyra beside him was real, and the danger they faced was very, very real. Get it together, Parker, he muttered to himself. What would Grandpa do? The answer came immediately. Assess the situation, use available resources, make a plan. Henry had always admired his grandfather's practical approach to problems. First, he needed to figure out where they were, or rather, when they could leave. Lyra had said they had a few hours before the collectors could find them. That gave him time to prepare. Henry carefully got out of the truck, trying not to disturb Lyra. The air in the clearing felt different somehow, crisper, more vibrant. Colors seemed slightly brighter, sounds a touch clearer. It was subtle, but noticeable. Pocket between realities, he murmured, looking up at the sky. It was blue, but with an undertone of violet that no Earth sky possessed. Henry checked the truck's gas gauge, half full. Good enough to get them to the mountains once they returned to their world. Next, he inventoried their supplies. a toolbox. In the back, a first aid kit under the seat, an old blanket, a flashlight, and about $20 in cash. Not much to work with. His phone showed no signal, which wasn't surprising given they were wherever they were. The time displayed was frozen at 1:37 a.m., the moment Lyra had transported them. Henry spread the blanket on a patch of soft grass near the truck and gently carried Lyra from the passenger seat. She barely stirred as he laid her down, her breathing, shallow but steady. Up close, the exhaustion on her face was even more apparent. Whatever she'd done to save them had taken a severe toll. The pendant felt warmer as he bent over her, and Henry had a sudden intuition. He removed the necklace and carefully placed it around Lyra's neck instead. Almost immediately, a soft violet glow enveloped her, and her breathing deepened. "That's it," he whispered. "Get your strength back." While Lyra rested, Henry explored the clearing. It was roughly circular, about 50 yards across, with no visible paths leading in or out. The trees surrounding it were unlike any he'd seen before, similar to pines, but with bark that shifted from brown to deep purple, depending on how the light hit it. Their needles had a silvery sheen. At the far edge of the clearing, Henry found something unexpected, a small stone structure half hidden by ferns. It looked like a miniature house no larger than a doghouse, with a peaked roof and a tiny door. Symbols were carved into the stone, the same symbols that had adorned the wooden crate. Henry knelt to examine it closer. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every line precise and purposeful. When he touched one of the symbols, it glowed briefly beneath his fingertips. "What are you?" he wondered aloud. "A waypoint," came Lyra's voice in his mind, still weak but clearer than before. Henry turned to see her approaching slowly, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The pendant glowed softly against her chest. "You should be resting," he said, rising to meet her. "I've rested enough for now." She knelt beside the stone structure, touching it with reverence. These exist at thin places between worlds. Travelers, like me, use them for shelter and guidance. So we're not the first to hide here. Far from it. My people have used these secret paths for generations, before the collectors began hunting us. Henry watched as Lyra traced the symbols with practiced fingers, each one lighting up at her touch. "What exactly are you doing?" "Checking our location and the stability of this pocket." Her expression grew troubled. "The boundaries are weaker than they should be. The collectors have been damaging the fabric between worlds with their machines." "How long do we really have?" Lyra met his eyes. 2 hours at most. We should be gone before then." Henry nodded, helping her to her feet. "Back to my world?" "Yes, but not to your home. They will be watching it." "We'll head straight for the mountains then," Henry decided. "Pete's cabin is remote. No electricity, no phone line. It'll be harder for them to find us there." They returned to the truck, and Henry helped Lyra back into the passenger seat. She looked better than before. Some color had returned to her cheeks and her hair had regained some of its luminescence, but she was still clearly weakened. "Keep the pendant for now," Henry said when she tried to return it. "You need it more than I do." "But without it you cannot hear me," she protested. "We'll figure out another way to communicate. Right now your recovery is more important." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the strange, not-quite-Earth sun move across the not-quite-Earth sky. Birds, or things that resembled birds, flitted among the purple-barked trees, their songs just a note or two different from what Henry was used to hearing. "My grandfather knew about all this," Henry said eventually. "All these years I thought he was just a simple woodworker with a gift for seeing the beauty in a piece of timber." Lyra smiled. "He was that too. The best bridges are always those who can see beyond the surface of things." "You think I inherited his ability? That I'm a bridge too?" "The pendant accepted you. That is rare for humans." She touched it thoughtfully. "And you found the hidden compartment in the crate without my help. You saw what was meant to be seen." Henry thought about his grandfather's question. What do you see in the wood, Henry? Perhaps it had been more than just a lesson about craftsmanship. Perhaps it had been training in its way. Tell me more about your world, he said. About Valen. Lyra's eyes lit up. It is beautiful. Similar to your Earth in many ways. We have forests and mountains, oceans and deserts. But the colors are different. The light has more depth to it. And magic, what you might call energy manipulation, is as natural to us as breathing is to you. And everyone there can do what you can do, move things with their minds, teleport. We have different gifts. Some can heal with a touch, others can speak to plants and animals. My particular talent lies in moving between spaces and working with water. It sounds amazing, Henry said. It was before the collectors came. Sadness crept into her mental voice. They discovered our world 5 years ago. At first, they just observed. Then they began taking people, those with the strongest gifts, experimenting on them, using their energy to power their machines. What do they want? Why go to all this trouble? Lyra's expression darkened. Resources. Power. Your world has nearly depleted its natural resources. Some humans, the ones who became the collectors, found a way to reach other realities, to take what isn't theirs. They're human? Henry asked, surprised. I thought they were something else. They were human once. The process of becoming a collector changes them. They sacrifice their humanity piece by piece, replacing it with machinery that allows them to exist between worlds. The implications of what she was saying sank in. So they're coming for Earth too? To take our resources? No, Lyra said. They're from Earth. They return here to deliver what they've stolen from other worlds. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. The idea that humans, his own species, could become the monsters he'd seen on the road was deeply disturbing. How do we stop them? The Resistance has a plan, a way to seal the passages between worlds, at least temporarily. But it requires someone with my abilities and access to a particular location. What location? A place where the boundaries are thinnest. In your world it would be. Lyra suddenly tensed, her head snapping up. Fear flashed across her face. What is it? Henry asked, alarmed. They've found us. Sooner than I expected. She pointed to the edge of the clearing, where the air had begun to shimmer and distort. We need to leave. Now. Henry started the truck, the engine roaring to life. Which way? Lyra pointed straight ahead toward a solid wall of trees. Drive. Don't stop. The boundary is weakest there. But there's nowhere to. Trust me. She insisted, gripping the dashboard as the shimmering at the edge of the clearing grew more pronounced. Dark shapes began to form within it, the unmistakable silhouettes of collectors. Henry floored the accelerator, sending the truck hurtling toward the trees. He fought every instinct screaming at him to stop, to turn away from the solid barrier of trunks and branches. The pendant around Lyra's neck blazed with light. She pressed her palm against the windshield, her face contorted with concentration. Just before they would have crashed, the air in front of them seemed to split open like a curtain being torn apart. Beyond it, Henry caught a glimpse of a rain-soaked mountain road, their world. They plunged through the opening, the truck shuddering violently as reality rearranged itself around them. There was a moment of crushing pressure, a flash of violet light, and then they were back, skidding on wet asphalt as rain pounded against the windshield. Henry fought to control the truck as it fishtailed across the slick road. Behind them, a tear in the air sealed itself shut with a sound like thunder. They had escaped. For now. Lyra slumped in her seat, the pendant around her neck now dull and lifeless. Blood trickled from her nose, and her skin had taken on an ashen pallor. Lyra? Henry called, alarmed. Lyra, can you hear me? Without the pendant's connection, he couldn't hear her thoughts. But she managed a weak nod, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Henry pressed harder on the accelerator, the wipers struggling against the downpour as he navigated the winding mountain road. The cabin was still an hour away, and he had no idea how much of a head start they had on the collectors. All he knew was that Lyra needed help, and somehow, he was the only one who could provide it. The cabin appeared through the curtain of rain like a mirage. A small, sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled against the mountainside. No light shone from its windows. No smoke curled from its chimney. It looked abandoned, which was exactly what Henry had hoped for. He parked the truck behind the cabin, out of sight from the narrow dirt road that was the only approach. Lyra hadn't stirred during the last 20 minutes of the drive. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cool to the touch. "We made it," Henry said, gently shaking her shoulder. "Lyra, we're here." She opened her eyes briefly, but there was no recognition in them, just exhaustion and pain. Without their mental connection, Henry couldn't tell what she was thinking or feeling. The pendant around her neck remained dull and lifeless. Rain pounded against the truck as Henry considered his options. The cabin would provide shelter and safety, but first he needed to get inside, and he couldn't leave Lyra alone in her current state. "Hang on," he told her, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm going to carry you." Henry retrieved the key from its hiding place under a rock by the back step, then returned to the truck. He gathered Lyra in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird with hollow bones, and carried her through the downpour to the cabin door. Inside, the air was cool and musty from disuse. Henry laid Lyra gently on the worn couch, then quickly set about making the place habitable. He found matches in a drawer and lit the kerosene lamps, casting the main room in a warm, golden glow. Next, he started a fire in the stone fireplace using logs from the stack on the porch. As warmth began to fill the cabin, Henry turned his attention back to Lyra. Her silver-white hair was plastered to her forehead, and her clothes were soaked through. She needed dry clothes and warmth. Henry found clean blankets in a trunk and a flannel shirt that belonged to Pete's wife in a drawer. He hesitated, feeling uncomfortable about changing Lyra's clothes while she was unconscious. But her wet garments were only making her condition worse. "I'm just trying to help," he said, hoping that somehow she could understand. With as much respect for her privacy as possible, he managed to get her into the dry shirt and wrapped in blankets by the fire. The pendant still lay against her chest, its violet stone now cloudy and dull. On impulse, Henry touched it, hoping for some connection, some guidance on how to help her. The stone remained cold beneath his fingers. "Come on," he whispered. "Tell me what to do." Nothing happened. Henry sat back on his heels, feeling helpless and frustrated. He'd been thrust into a situation beyond his understanding. Interdimensional refugees, human-turned monsters hunting them, magical pendants, and parallel worlds. And now the one person who could explain it all might be dying, and he had no idea how to save her. Outside, the storm continued to rage, wind howling around the cabin's eaves and rain lashing against the windows. Henry stoked the fire higher, hoping the warmth would help revive Lyra. Then he set about securing the cabin, checking locks, closing curtains, taking stock of supplies. Pete kept the place well stocked with canned food and bottled water. There was enough to last a week or more. A battery-powered radio sat on a shelf along with a first aid kit and some basic tools. No phone, no internet, no electricity, just as Henry had hoped. Nothing that could lead the collectors to them. As he worked, Henry kept glancing at Lyra, looking for any sign of improvement. The color had returned somewhat to her cheeks, but she remained unconscious, the rise and fall of her chest barely visible beneath the blankets. Night fell, the darkness outside absolute, except for when lightning flashed across the sky. Henry sat in a chair beside the couch, watching over Lyra, the events of the past 2 days playing through his mind like a fever dream. Had it really been just yesterday that he'd opened that strange wooden crate and found her inside? It felt like weeks had passed since then. His normal life, the workshop, his restoration projects, his quiet evenings alone, seemed like memories from someone else's life. "What do you see in the wood, Henry?" His grandfather's voice echoed in his thoughts. He'd always thought it was just a lesson about craftsmanship, about looking beyond the surface to see the potential within. But now he understood it had been something more, a way of teaching him to see beyond this world into others. Henry looked down at his hands, calloused, strong hands that knew how to transform raw lumber into things of beauty and function. Hands that had opened a crate and changed his life forever. What else could they do? What else had his grandfather been preparing him for? A soft moan drew his attention. Lyra was stirring, her eyelids fluttering. Lyra? Henry leaned forward, hope surging in his chest. Can you hear me? Her violet eyes opened, unfocused at first, then settling on his face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Without the pendant's connection, they had no way to communicate. The pendant. Henry looked at the stone against her chest. It remained dull and lifeless. Lyra followed his gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. With trembling fingers, she lifted the pendant from around her neck and held it out to him. Are you sure? Henry asked. You need it more than I do. She nodded weakly, pressing the pendant into his palm. Henry slipped the cord over his head, the stone settling against his chest. It remained cold and dark. It's not working, he said, disappointment heavy in his voice. Lyra placed her hand over the pendant, over his heart. She closed her eyes in concentration, her brow furrowing with effort. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, a faint glow began to emanate from between their fingers. The pendant warmed against Henry's skin, the violet stone clearing like a fog lifting. Henry. Lyra's voice in his mind was faint, like a whisper from far away. Can you hear me? Yes, Henry said, relief washing over him. Yes, I can hear you. Are you okay? Weakened but alive. Her mental voice strengthened slightly. Thanks to you. I didn't do anything. You're the one who got us away from those things. You trusted me. You helped me. Few humans would have done the same. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, the spaces between thunderclaps growing longer. What happened back there? Henry asked. You said the collectors found us sooner than expected. They're growing stronger, Lyra explained, her mental voice troubled. The barriers between worlds are weakening faster than we realized. The collectors can move through more easily now. Is that why you're so weak? Because you had to fight against them? Partly, but also because... She hesitated. I'm not just exhausted, Henry, I'm dying. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? No, you can't be. My kind cannot survive long in your world without help. The energy here is different, incompatible with our bodies. The crate was designed to preserve me during transport. Without it, I'm fading. There must be something we can do, Henry insisted, panic rising in his throat. Some way to help you. Lyra's expression softened. There is one way. I must complete my mission. Seal the passage the collectors are using. Doing so will create a surge of energy that might be enough to send me home. Might be? It's dangerous, she admitted. The sealing requires a tremendous amount of power. I may not survive the attempt, but if I do nothing, I will certainly die, and the collectors will continue to ravage worlds. Henry took her hand, squeezing it gently. Tell me what to do. How can I help? The passage must be sealed from both sides simultaneously. I need to channel energy through the pendant to create the seal on this side, while the resistance creates the seal on my side. And where exactly is this passage? The thinnest point between our worlds. In your reality, it's a place of ancient power. Images flashed in Henry's mind, a clearing in a forest, standing stones arranged in a circle, moonlight shining on their weathered surfaces. It's not far from here. That's why your grandfather built a cabin in these mountains. He knew about the passage, Henry realized. He helped guard it. kept the collectors away when they first discovered it. Henry thought about his grandfather with new understanding and respect. The quiet old man, who taught him to work with wood, had been a warrior in a battle Henry hadn't even known was being fought. "When do we need to do this?" he asked. "Tomorrow night. When the moon is full, the resistance will be ready on their side." "And the collectors? They'll try to stop us." "Yes." Fear flickered through their mental connection. "They'll sense what we're attempting. They'll come in force." Henry stood up, pacing the small cabin as he thought. "We need a plan, a way to hold them off long enough for you to complete the sealing." "The pendant can create a temporary barrier," Lyra suggested. "But it won't last long against their machines." An idea began to form in Henry's mind. He looked around the cabin, seeing it with new eyes, not just as a shelter but as a potential fortress. His grandfather had built this place. There might be more to it than met the eye. "Get some rest," he told Lyra. "I'm going to search the cabin. My grandfather might have left something that can help us." While Lyra drifted back to sleep, Henry began a thorough exploration of the cabin. He checked every drawer, every cabinet, looking for anything unusual or out of place. In the bedroom, he found a loose floorboard beneath the rug. Prying it up revealed a small metal box. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his grandfather's familiar handwriting. Diagrams of standing stones, sketches of symbols like those on the crate, notes about thin places and bridges between worlds, and most importantly, instructions for creating barriers against collectors. Henry returned to the main room, journal in hand. "Lyra, I found something." She was awake again, looking slightly stronger than before. "Your grandfather's knowledge?" "Yes. He left a journal hidden under the floor. It has information about the collectors, about the standing stones, about how to fight them." Hope kindled in Lyra's violet eyes. "Then we have a chance." "More than a chance," Henry said with growing confidence. "My grandfather spent years preparing for this. He knew someone would need to seal the passage eventually." They spent the rest of the night studying the journal, making plans. According to his grandfather's notes, the standing stones were 3 miles from the cabin, deep in the forest. They amplified energy from both worlds, creating a natural doorway that the collectors had expanded with their machines. To seal it, Lyra would need to channel energy through the pendant while standing at the center of the stone circle. Henry would need to protect her during the process, which his grandfather estimated would take 15 minutes to complete. The collectors would sense the buildup of energy and come to stop them. They couldn't be killed by conventional means, but they could be disrupted and temporarily dispersed using certain combinations of elements and energy. By dawn, they had a plan, risky, dangerous, and with no guarantee of success. But a plan, nonetheless. Lyra had regained some of her strength, enough to sit up and eat a little of the food Henry prepared. The pendant glowed stronger now, the connection between them clearer. "If this works," she said as they watched the sun rise through the cabin window, "I'll be sent back to my world when the passage seals." "And if it doesn't work?" Henry asked quietly. "Then the collectors continue their harvest of worlds, and we likely won't survive to see it." Henry nodded, accepting the stakes. "When I opened that crate 2 days ago, I never imagined any of this. Do you regret it?" Lyra's mental voice was gentle, curious. Henry thought about his life before, predictable, safe, lonely. And his life now? Dangerous, uncertain, but somehow more vibrant and meaningful than it had been in years. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. Even knowing you might die tonight? Even then," Henry smiled at her. "My grandfather used to say that a life without purpose is no life at all. I think I finally understand what he meant." Lyra's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "In my world, we have a saying. The bridges between souls are stronger than the bridges between worlds. I'm glad I found you, Henry Parker. I'm glad I found you too, Lyra of Valen." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean and the sky a brilliant blue. In a few hours the sun would set, the full moon would rise, and they would make their stand against the collectors at the ancient stone circle. Whatever happened there would change both their worlds forever. And as Henry looked at Lyra, this impossible woman from another reality who had tumbled into his life inside a wooden crate, he knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to help her complete her mission and return home safely, even if it meant saying goodbye.